There's a quiet kind of power in walking away from something you could probably win. Not because you're broken, not because you're afraid, but because you finally started listening to the right voices, including the one inside your own head that says 10 days of silence will do more for you than one more trophy in a minor event. Emma Raducanu learned that lesson the hard way, or rather, she's still learning it. And Martina Navratilova, who has never been afraid to speak uncomfortable truths into a microphone, put it as plainly as anyone ever has. So Emma needs to be in charge. She's old enough to know what she should be doing and surround herself with people and then trust in them. Those words were about Raducanu, but they landed on Alexandra Eala like a diagnosis. Navratilova has been watching Eala for months now, and her admiration has always carried a flicker of worry. She saw it back in March at Indian Wells, the serve that doesn't yet intimidate, the physical ceiling that sits just a little too low when the WTA's hardest hitters start unloading from the baseline. She even went on record at the Australian Open, live on Tennis Channel, telling organizers to their faces that they were scheduling Eala wrong. Put her on bigger courts, Navratilova said. Let her fans in, give her the structural advantage that every other top player gets by default. Nobody listened. Now it's late April and the scene unfolding around Eala is not one of shock or scandal. It's one of deliberate, almost surgical withdrawal. She has just pulled out of the Catalonia Open, a WTA 125 event where she was seeded to make a deep run, where the draw was soft enough to taste a final, where the ranking points were there for the taking. But there was no formal announcement, no medical timeline, no emotional video statement. She didn't even appear on the official withdrawal list. A journalist scrolling through Twitter at midnight caught the change. Lechenko, ranked number 160, had quietly taken her spot. That was it. That was the notification. The clay record for 2026 now reads 2 wins, 3 losses. Stuttgart, Linz, Madrid, 3 exits in a row. In Madrid, she won her opener on the showcase court, basking in the roar of a Filipino crowd that turns every match into a home game. Then, without a word of explanation, the tournament moved her to court 5 for the second round. The energy died. The crowd couldn't fit. She lost to Elise Mertens 6-2, 6-1 in 76 minutes. Gone at the final hour of a tournament she had every reason to fight for. But this withdrawal from Catalonia is not a collapse. It is a calculation, cold, quiet, and possibly very smart. The Italian Open starts May 5th. That's Sabalenka, Rybakina, Swiatek, 3 of the 4 best players in the world, all of them dangerous on clay for different reasons. Sabalenka brings the heaviest ball striking in the women's game. Rybakina's serve cuts through the slowest surfaces like a knife through overripe fruit. Swiatek has won Rome 4 times and treats the Foro Italico like her personal living room. The French Open follows on May 24th. Missing Catalonia bought Eala 10 full days. Not a week, not a weekend. 10 days, that is what she has right now, a 10-day corridor of silence and training and decision-making. And the way her team uses those days will either define her clay season or quietly bury it before Roland Garros even begins. Catalonia wasn't a throwaway tournament. It was a legitimate opportunity. A WTA 125 event in Lade Alcobendas, a level where Eala carried genuine seeding weight and a realistic path to the final. Wang Xingyu and Peyton Stearns were above her in the pecking order, but neither was untouchable. She had the game to go deep. She had the ranking to demand respect in that draw, and she chose to walk away from it anyway. The silence around that decision is louder than anything her camp has officially said. The minor injury label tells you almost nothing. That's the point. In professional tennis, when a team wants to reassure fans, they give details, a specific body part, a recovery window, a physio update. When they want to buy time, they give a category. Minor injury is a category. It doesn't explain why her name was missing from the official withdrawal list. It doesn't explain why the tournament's own administration processed her exit without a standard notification. It doesn't explain why a journalist scrolling through draw updates at midnight had to break the news to the tennis world. That is not how routine withdrawals get handled. That is how something more complicated gets quietly managed. What makes this harder to accept at face value is the trajectory leading into it. Eala's 2026 clay season has been a slow-motion problem since the moment it started in Linz in early April. She beat Julia Grabher in the first round, a solid enough opener, then ran into Jelena Ostapenko in the round of 16 and lost in straight sets, 6-4, 7-5. Ostapenko is a former French Open champion and one of the flattest, hardest hitters in the women's game. Losing to her on clay is not a scandal. The concern was how Eala lost, unable to handle the pace, broken down physically in rallies she should have been competitive in. Stuttgart came next. Leylah Fernandez beat her 6-1, 6-4 in the first round. That scoreline matters more than the name attached to it. Fernandez is a quality player, but she is not someone who should be dismantling Eala in under an hour. The first set in particular was a collapse. Eala could not hold serve consistently, could not find the angles to disrupt Fernandez's rhythm, and ended up chasing a match that slipped away before she had fully arrived in it. The loss dropped her out of Stuttgart without a single set won and sent her to Madrid carrying 2 consecutive early exits as baggage. Madrid was supposed to be the reset. She drew Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova in the first round, a former French Open finalist but now ranked at number 116 and clearly not at peak form. Eala won that match 6-3, 6-3 on the Arancha Sánchez Vicario Stadium. The Filipino crowd packed the court. The atmosphere was exactly the kind of electric environment that historically pulls the best out of her. She looked composed, aggressive, and technically sharp in stretches. That performance was real. What happened next was also real. The Madrid Open made a decision between rounds that its own scheduling team has never publicly explained. Eala, after winning on one of the tournament's most prestigious courts in front of thousands of fans, was moved to Court 5 for her second-round match against Elise Mertens. Court 5 is not a showcase venue. It is not built for the scale of crowd that follows Eala everywhere she plays. The Filipino supporters who had filled the larger stadium the day before had nowhere near the same access. The noise dropped. The energy changed. The structural advantage that Eala's popularity gives her, the wall of sound. The momentum-shifting crowd reactions was effectively removed by a scheduling decision nobody at the tournament has been asked to justify. Martina Navratilova has been making exactly this argument since January. At the Australian Open, she sat alongside Lindsay Davenport on Tennis Channel and said directly that organizers needed to keep player fan bases in mind when making scheduling decisions. Eala had just lost to Alicia Parks on Court 6 at Melbourne Park, while thousands of Filipino fans stood in lines that stretched outside the venue, unable to get inside. Navratilova's words were not vague diplomatic encouragement. She told the WTA on air that they were getting this wrong. Davenport backed her up, saying Eala probably needed to be on a bigger show court. 2 Grand Slam legends both saying the same thing at the same time, and the tour absorbed the criticism without a visible policy shift. By Indian Wells in March, Navratilova had moved from scheduling complaints to technical analysis. She called Eala crafty. She acknowledged the left-handed variety, the slice, the court IQ. Then she identified the ceiling. The serve needed to be bigger, the kick needed more power. Eala's physical frame, she said, made it harder to absorb the pace of the tour's hardest hitters. The solution was to get stronger and punch up that delivery. That assessment was not a dismissal, it was a road map. And what followed across Stuttgart, Linz, and Madrid was essentially a live demonstration of exactly the vulnerability Navratilova had described. Every loss came against a player who hit through Eala rather than around her. Every exit came when the rally length increased and the pace became too heavy to redirect. The Mertens match in Madrid was the clearest version of this pattern. Mertens converted 5 of 11 break points. Eala converted 0 of 1. The serve numbers told the full story. Eala won 53% of her first serve points in a match where Mertens won 81% of hers. On a slow clay surface where first serve percentage becomes even more critical to controlling rally tempo, that gap is functionally insurmountable. Mertens did not need to do anything spectacular. She simply held serve, absorbed Eala's variety, and waited for the errors that a physically overmatched player produces when the rallies stretch past a comfortable exchange length. The match lasted 76 minutes. It was not competitive in the way the scoreline might generously imply. Then came the umpire moment in the second set. Eala received a time violation warning without what she felt was adequate prior notice. She stopped play to dispute it. "First of all, please let me speak. You need to give me a warning first." The umpire did not reverse the call. Eala returned to the baseline and the match ended shortly after. It was a small incident in isolation. But inside the larger context of a player already losing on a court she should not have been assigned to, it read differently. It was one more thing that went wrong in a match that had already accumulated several. Eala's own words after the Madrid defeat were measured and forward-facing. "That's it for Madrid. I'm so grateful for my time here. I will be back stronger." That is not the language of someone spiraling. It is the language of someone who has absorbed a difficult stretch and is actively choosing not to dramatize it publicly. She also said something more telling in a separate interview about her approach to the schedule. "It's very demanding, but I'm happy to play good tennis and see progress. One of the things I'm learning to do is switch off tennis mode and step outside of tennis." That second quote is the one worth sitting with. A player who is learning to step outside of tennis mode is a player who has been inside it too intensely. The Catalonia withdrawal viewed through that lens is not avoidance, it is self-management. It is a young athlete looking at a calendar full of landmines and saying, quietly, "I need 10 days. The Italian Open in Rome begins May 5th. The draw will include Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, and Iga Swiatek, 3 of the 4 best players in the world, all of them dangerous on clay for different reasons. Eala walked into Rome last year and lost to Marta Kostyuk 6-0, 6-1 in the first round. That result was not a fluke or a bad day. It was a measurement of how far her clay game still needed to travel. 12 months later, the gap has narrowed. But based on the evidence of this season, it has not closed. What the 10 days between Catalonia and Rome represent is a genuine opportunity to address the specific things Navratilova flagged and the Madrid matches confirmed. The serve, the physical capacity to handle sustained pace, the second serve vulnerability. She won only 37% of second serve points in her opener against Pavlyuchenkova, and that was against a player ranked number 116. Against Sabalenka or Swiatek, that number becomes a match-ending liability within the first 3 games. Eala is a graduate of the Rafael Nadal Academy, trained on clay since 2018, shaped by the same philosophy that produced the greatest clay court player in history. The foundation is there. The tools exist. The question Navratilova essentially posed back in March is whether Eala can access those tools under the physical demands of the WTA's elite level, and specifically whether her body can generate the kind of serve that forces top 10 players to play defensively rather than offensively. The French Open begins May 24th. Eala's clay buildup heading into Roland Garros now runs through the Italian Open and potentially the Parma Ladies Open, a WTA 125 event running May 12th to 17th that she will enter if her Rome campaign ends before the second week. That is the full picture of what her preparation looks like. 2 tournaments, one of them among the most demanding fields in women's tennis, used to solve problems that 3 tournaments this season have not yet solved. The margin for error is tight, the timeline is compressed, and the pressure of a second consecutive Roland Garros where she needs to win first-round matches to protect her ranking makes every remaining clay match consequential in a way that goes beyond confidence. None of this means Eala is broken. Her 2026 overall record stands at 16-11. Her best result this year came at the ASB Classic in Auckland, where she reached the semifinals. On hard courts, she has beat players ranked inside the top 20 and shown the kind of game that genuinely belongs at the elite level. But clay is a separate conversation, and it has been a separate conversation for her since she turned professional. Her 2025 clay record was 2-4. Her 2026 clay record is currently 2-3. The surface remains the one place on tour where the gap between her ceiling and her floor is widest, and where the physical demands of the WTA's hardest hitters expose the exact limitations Navratilova described with such precision back in March. Withdrawal from Catalonia is the right call for all the reasons her team has not publicly stated. Rest matters. Focused preparation matters. Walking into the Foro Italico against a field that includes 3 top 4 players without having addressed the serve and the physical load management would have been the actual mistake. Eala at her best is crafty, intelligent, and capable of winning matches nobody expects her to win. She has done it against Madison Keys. The clay version of that player exists. It just has not shown up consistently enough in 2026 to quiet the conversation that Navratilova started 4 months ago and the Madrid Open's Court 5 decision reignited last week. 10 days, Rome, then Paris. The final chapter of Alexandra Eala's clay season is still being written, and when the Italian Open draw drops and her name appears in it, this conversation is going to get very interesting very fast.